So if we go back to 2018, Netflix spent hundreds of millions of dollars to acquire the complete rights to the Narnia universe.
Right, just a massive, massive deal.
Yeah, and they made this really flashy promise to their subscribers, basically saying that they were going to stream the ultimate fantasy epic directly into your living room.
Yep.
But, fast forward to today, and they are delaying their own flagship movie for nearly a year, and specifically to guarantee that you cannot watch it on your couch.
I mean, it is just a stunning reversal. If you look at the whole history of streaming platforms, their entire foundational ethos has been about destroying the theatrical window.
Exactly.
The goal was always immediate access, right? Bringing the multiplex straight to the iPad.
Which is why the news we are diving into today is so fascinating. We are looking at this upcoming adaptation of C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia, directed by Greta Gerwig.
Such an interesting choice of director, too.
Oh, for sure. But the headline that everyone is reacting to right now is this major delay. So our mission for this deep dive is to, look past that surface level headline and really explain why this delay is actually a massive victory for anyone who loves movies.
It really is.
We are going to break down the highly calculated business strategy going on here, the history of the franchise itself, and honestly, a genuinely wild creative vision that's driving all of this.
Yeah, it really requires us to look at the mechanics of how Hollywood functions right now. Because, a release delay is usually a huge distress signal.
Right, like something went terribly wrong.
Exactly. It usually means the studio is panicking, or the test screenings went poorly, or they're doing frantic, incredibly expensive reshoots.
Yeah.
But when you look at the specific dates revealed in the latest announcements, this is clearly not a production delay. This is a deliberate structural pivot in a streaming giant's whole business model.
So, okay, let's unpack this, because the dates are the key to this whole thing.
They really are.
The film is Narnia, the Magician's Nephew. It was supposed to come out in November 2026, which is, your standard, incredibly safe holiday release window for a family fantasy movie.
The perfect time for it, usually.
Right. But Netflix has pushed it to February 2027. And they didn't just delay it. They announced a highly specific, tiered theatrical rollout.
Which is the crazy part.
It is. So on February 10th, 2027, the movie gets exclusive early showings in IMAX. Then 2 days later, on February 12th, it gets a massive global theatrical release. And it does not land on the Netflix streaming platform until April 2, 2027.
What's fascinating here is that 7-week gap between the theatrical premiere and the actual streaming date. That is the entire story.
Yeah.
Netflix is voluntarily giving up almost 2 months of exclusivity on their own hugely expensive intellectual property.
I was trying to wrap my head around the business logic here while reading the sources because it feels so counterintuitive.
Oh, completely.
It's like, imagine a highly exclusive, delivery-only pop-up restaurant, right?
I'm with you.
And then suddenly they decide to build this massive, gorgeous brick-and-mortar flagship location for 2 whole months before you can even order the food at home.
That's a really good way to look at it.
Because they don't actually care about the few hundred people sitting in the dining room, right? They are doing it for the prestige. They want the glowing reviews, the global press, the cultural credibility that the physical location creates.
Right, so by the time you finally order it on the app, the perceived value has just skyrocketed.
Exactly.
That is the perfect way to contextualize it. Because if you just look at the raw numbers, Netflix is, at its core, a tech company.
Yeah.
Their metric for success has always been subscriber retention, keeping you inside their walled garden.
Yeah.
So putting a movie in AMC theaters for 7 weeks seems to completely violate that core directive.
Wait, I have to push back on that just a little because doesn't it actively cannibalize their subscription model?
How do you mean?
Well, if I can just go down the street, buy a ticket, and watch this huge Narnia movie with a bucket of popcorn on a Friday night, why am I paying $15 a month for Netflix? It feels like they're giving their own subscribers a reason to pause their accounts.
You would think so, yeah. But you really had to look at the psychology of the modern consumer here. They aren't trying to sell you a single movie ticket. They are trying to manufacture cultural FOMO, the fear of missing out.
Ah, right.
The Netflix algorithm is incredibly powerful, obviously, but it cannot generate the kind of global, undeniable zeitgeist moment that a traditional theater release does.
It can't create a Barbenheimer.
Exactly. It just can't. When a movie makes hundreds of millions of dollars at the global box office, it dominates social media, it dominates late-night talk shows, it becomes a true event.
It has a footprint.
Yes. We call it the blockbuster halo effect. So by the time April 2nd rolls around and The Magician's Nephew finally appears on the Netflix homepage, it isn't just another algorithmically recommended pile that you might just scroll past.
Right, it's not just background noise.
No, it is a proven premium cultural event that you now get, quote-unquote, for free with your subscription. Netflix realized that to make their platform feel indispensable, they have to produce things that the outside world has already validated as massive.
Wow, and that completely explains the timeline. I mean, they bought the rights back in 2018. They have been sitting on this IP for nearly a decade.
A very long time in the streaming world.
Yeah, they didn't just rush out a cheap television series to fill some quarterly content quota. They were playing the longest game imaginable to build a true studio tentpole.
Absolutely.
But, you know, if Netflix is going to risk this much and basically break all of their own golden rules for a 7-week theatrical window, they can't just remake the same movie we've already seen.
Well, they'd be dead in the water.
Right. They need a blank slate. And here's where it gets really interesting, because their choice of source material is where the strategy goes from smart to kind of brilliant.
It is easily the most fascinating narrative choice they could have made with this property.
Right. So the film they're making is The Magician's Nephew. And for the diehard fans listening, you probably know that this was the 6th book published in the series way back in 1955.
Yep.
But chronologically, in the universe, it is a prequel. It takes place a full 1,000 years before the events of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
A massive time jump backward.
Yeah. And what really struck me about the source material is that while this specific story has been adapted into radio plays, theater productions, and even manga, there has never been a live-action film adaptation of it.
Never. Which is almost unheard of for a fantasy property with this much global name recognition.
It totally solves the biggest problem any reboot faces, which is the nostalgia trap.
Oh, for sure.
Because when you say Narnia to most people, they immediately picture the 2005 Disney and Walden Media movie.
Right, the CGI Aslan, the White Witch.
Exactly, the kids stepping through the fur coats and the wardrobe. If Greta Gerwig started there, every single frame of her movie would be compared to that 2005 version.
It would be impossible to escape.
But by starting with the prequel, she bypasses the nostalgia entirely. We don't have a definitive cinematic image of the magician's nephew burned into our cultural memory yet.
It is a phenomenal strategic maneuver. But, if we connect this to the bigger picture, it goes much deeper than just dodging the 2005 film.
Really?
Oh, yeah. If we look at the historical timeline of Narnia adaptations, there is a very specific structural curse that has plagued this franchise for literally half a century.
Wait, a curse?
Yeah, everyone who tries to adapt C.S. Lewis eventually hits a brick wall.
What do you mean by a structural curse, like a logistical issue behind the scenes?
Precisely. Let's look at the track record here. You have the ITV television serial in 1967,
Okay.
the BBC series in 1988, and then the massive Walden Media theatrical run starting in 2005. They all attempted the exact same strategy.
With wardrobe, right?
Exactly. They all started with The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe because it is undeniably the most famous book.
Right.
Then they followed it up with the next 2 published books, Prince Caspian and The Voyage of the Dawn Treader.
Right, I remember those movies.
And then, without fail, the franchise collapses. All of them stopped after 3 adaptations.
That is wild. I didn't realize they all hit the exact same wall 3 projects in.
Every single time.
Why? Like, what happens after Dawn Treader that just kills the momentum?
Well, the mechanism behind the failure is really the nature of C.S. Lewis's writing itself. Narnia was not designed as a clean, linear cinematic universe like Marvel or Harry Potter.
Oh, interesting.
The books jump around wildly in time. In the books following Dawn Treader, the original main characters, the Pevensey children, are essentially phased out.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah, the timeline jumps forward hundreds of years, the tone gets a lot heavier, the allegories get much more complex, and from a production standpoint, your child actors are aging rapidly in the real world, while the characters they play are just sidelined.
That sounds like a mess.
It is. It becomes a logistical and narrative nightmare to keep a mainstream movie audience invested when the core cast and the timeline just keep resetting on them.
Ugh, so it really is a structural nightmare. If you start in the middle of the timeline with Wardrobe, you immediately paint yourself into a corner with all the sequels.
They're doomed from the start.
But by going chronologically, by starting with The Magician's Nephew, which is literally the origin story of the universe, Gerwig isn't just resetting the board, she is building a completely new runway for the entire franchise.
Yes.
She avoids the aging actor problem from the jump because she is establishing the foundation of the world first, before any of those other famous characters even exist.
She is essentially bypassing the graveyard where every other adaptation has died. She is unearthing the actual bedrock of the franchise.
Okay, so we know why they chose this specific story. Now we have to talk about how she's actually going to pull it off. Because Greta Gerwig's creative vision for this, based on her statements and our sources, is incredibly ambitious.
Oh, without a doubt.
And it honestly creates a massive stylistic paradox.
You're referring to her transition from Barbie to Narnia, right?
Yeah. Yes. I mean, think about Barbie. That movie was a hyper-visual, tactile, neon pink sensory overload.
Very much so.
It was completely defined by its physical production design, the plastic dream houses, the bright costumes, all of it. But The Magician's Nephew is a creation myth. The story literally begins in a void.
Right. Before Narnia exists, there is just nothing.
Nothing. And then, as Gerwig highlights in her quote, there is this gorgeously improbable but completely brilliant concept of a cosmic lion singing the world of Narnia to life.
I love that.
She goes on to say that the idea of a universe built out of music is something that has always lived in her heart.
It is just a beautifully poetic phrase, a universe built out of music.
It's gorgeous. But, practically speaking, how does a director who is famous for overwhelming visual aesthetics transition to a story driven by a singing lion in a void?
It's a huge pivot.
Like, if there's nothing to look at initially, is she going to rely entirely on sound design to build the world?
Well, this raises an important question about what actually makes a successful adaptation. And it is likely why Netflix wanted her specifically.
Yeah.
When you analyze her approach, she clearly understands that you cannot build a fantasy world purely on spectacle. The mechanism of world building has to be grounded in something deeply human.
Oh, okay.
Listen closely to the rest of her statement from the source. She talks about how Lewis made her believe in magic, that anywhere could be enchanted. But the linchpin of her entire philosophy is when she says that this all was available to everyone, even ordinary people like me.
Even ordinary people like me. Man, that really strips away the whole chosen one trope you usually get in fantasy.
Exactly. That is the emotional anchor. Whether Gerwig is directing a story about a plastic doll discovering mortality, or two kids from mundane 1900s London accidentally stepping into a void that is literally being sung into existence, the spectacle means nothing without the human reaction. The awe of the ordinary person is what bridges the gap for the audience. The contrast between the dusty, boring reality of London and a universe being formed by sound waves is what makes the magic feel real.
That contrast is so important. It makes the magic feel earned. And honestly, it brings us to why this deep dive matters for you, the listener, right now.
Absolutely.
Because even if you don't care about talking lions, or if you haven't read a fantasy novel since middle school, you should care about the story because you are watching a tectonic shift in the entertainment landscape happen in real time.
The ripple effects of this release strategy will impact how every major studio handles their biggest properties for the next decade.
Completely. So what does this all mean? When you are walking past your local theater in early 2027 and you see those massive IMAX posters for Narnia, The Magician's Nephew, you are going to know the secret behind it. You'll know that this isn't just another sequel rolling off an assembly line. It is the culmination of a near-decade-long strategy that started in 2018. It is a creative and business maneuver so powerful that it literally forced the biggest streaming company on the planet to swallow its pride, change its DNA, and admit that the traditional movie theater is still the only place where true cultural magic happens.
They're doing it because they have to prove to the world that this is an event.
Exactly. They are giving it that 7-week run just to prove it.
And, that leads to a really profound question about what that event will actually feel like in the theater. We are currently living in an era of cinema that is completely exhausted by visual CGI spectacle.
Girl, tell me about it.
We are totally numb to digital armies crashing into each other, massive laser beams shooting into the sky, over-rendered explosions. Our eyes are tired.
The fatigue is so real. You can only watch so many pixels explode before it all just blends together.
Exactly. But Gerwig is obsessing over this concept of Aslan singing the world of Narnia to life. Think about the literal physics of that in an IMAX theater. Think about sub-bass frequencies that you can literally feel in your chest.
Oh, wow.
Think about cymatics, the visual representation of sound waves moving physical matter. In a cinematic landscape defined almost exclusively by what we see, How might a blockbuster where the creation of the universe is a fundamentally auditory event completely upend our expectations?
That is a wild thought.
If the score and the sound design replace CGI as the primary engine for world building, it might change not just how an epic fantasy movie looks, but much more importantly, how it feels.